check her out. She telling somebody to come down there. She is telling somebody to come down there. She's like, meet me after the game. Look at her. Meet me after the game. Alyssa Thomas and the Indiana Fever fan base, the big rival.
What you just witnessed represents the most devastating psychological warfare in WNBA history. And here's the part that'll blow your mind. Caitlin Clark wasn't even on the court. I'm Jackson Riley, and I've been filtering through the digital breadcrumbs of what really went down in Indianapolis. And what I discovered exposes a truth so profound about the current state of this league that even the veterans can't handle it anymore. We're about to connect dots that nobody else is willing to touch, expose the psychological stranglehold one rookie has established over an entire league, and reveal why Alyssa Thomas just became the latest casualty in Caitlin Clark's complete takeover of women's basketball. But here's what they missed. This isn't about one incident. This is about the moment the WNBA realized it has a new queen, and not everyone can psychologically handle the transition. Stick around, because the signals I've been reading suggest this story goes deeper than anyone imagined. And by the end, you'll understand why Thomas's breakdown was inevitable. Let me paint you the picture of what actually happened in Indianapolis, because the temperature of the online conversation tells a very different story than what you saw on the surface. The Phoenix Mercury rolled into Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and immediately the psychological warfare began, but not the way you think.
Thomas in that game to a noticeable degree. She was complaining about it seemingly everything throughout the entire game, so I'm sure Fever fans took some solace.
The digital breadcrumbs I've been following reveal that Thomas was already mentally compromised before tip-off. See, when you're dealing with Clark's gravitational pull, it doesn't matter if she's in street clothes on the bench. Her presence distorts everything around her. Thomas knew she was walking into Clark's house, facing Clark's fans, and defending Clark's biggest rival in DeWanna Bonner. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Thomas tried to project strength by going after the fans, reportedly telling them she came to play for a real basketball team. That's not competitive fire, that's defensive deflection. She was trying to convince herself as much as the crowd.
Alyssa Thomas going back and forth with a fan, man. I mean, she just, I don't know if she just can't ignore anybody that's just coming at her, you know what I'm saying? And I'm pretty sure it's not anything racist or anything like that. I just think they get under her skin.
Now, let's break down what this behavioral analysis tells us. When someone can't ignore anybody that's just coming at her, that's not toughness. That's insecurity, manifesting as aggression. Thomas was fighting ghosts, because in her mind, every boo was really about Clark's dominance over the conversation. But the story doesn't end there. See, I've been connecting the digital dots, and what emerges is a pattern that goes back months. Every time Thomas has faced adversity this season, particularly anything connected to the Clark narrative, she's shown the same psychological fragility. Let me take you back to why this whole situation exists, because the official sources won't tell you this. But if you follow the digital breadcrumbs, a different picture emerges about DeWanna Bonner's departure from Indiana.
The fit just wasn't working, but at the end of the day, all of it points to the arrows of what? Quitting the basketball team. Big deal about her getting booed. Now, Sophie Cunningham was getting booed.
The temperature of the ETU online conversation around Bonner's exit reveals something crucial. This wasn't a mutual parting. The timeline tells the real story. 9 games. That's how long it took for Bonner to decide the Indiana Fever wasn't worth her commitment. But here's the psychological twist nobody's talking about. She didn't just quit on the team. She quit on the Caitlin Clark experience. Think about it. Bonner, a veteran with championship aspirations, couldn't handle being in Clark's shadow. The pressure, the attention, The constant microscope, it broke her mentally before she ever gave it a real chance. And when she bailed to Phoenix, she was essentially running to Alyssa Thomas for psychological comfort. Now, reading the signals from that return game, Thomas wasn't just defending her partner. She was validating her own fear that Clark's influence had become too powerful to compete with.
Thomas just told fans around the bench she came to play for a real team several times. DeWanna Bonner, first time coming back to Indianapolis after pretty much quitting the team.
Official sources won't tell you this, but the online chatter is too loud to ignore. Thomas's defensive behavior exposed exactly why Bonner fled Indiana in the first place. They couldn't psychologically handle the Clark ecosystem. But here's what happened next that proves Clark's psychological dominance even while sitting on the bench.
Check her out. She telling somebody to come down there. She is telling somebody to come down there. She's like, meet me after the game. Look at her. Meet me after the game. Alyssa Thomas and the Indiana Fever fan base, the big rival.
Look at that energy. Look at that aggression. Meet me after the game. Thomas was operating on pure emotional overload, trying to project power in Clark's house. But the moment the final buzzer sounded and it was time for accountability, where was all that energy? That brings us to the inevitable question: why does the league's supposed tough veteran become a vanishing act when it's time to explain her behavior?
The media availability rule has been broken by the Phoenix Mercury and was broken last night. No later than 10 minutes following the game, each head coach and 2 players, which is the leading scorer and the key contributor per team, will be available in separate press rooms for an in-person Zoom meeting.
I've been filtering out the noise, and here's what the signals point to. Thomas violated league policy not because she was tired or frustrated, but because she couldn't psychologically handle explaining her behavior in Clark's building. Tatuentiu out Clark's media about Clark's influence on the situation. The WNBA media access policy is crystal clear. Leading scorer shows up within 10 minutes. No exceptions. But Thomas created an exception for herself. And why? Because facing those questions meant admitting what she couldn't say out loud, that Clark's gravitational pull had driven her to emotional breakdown. But here's where this story gets absolutely devastating for Thomas and anyone else still fighting Clark's psychological takeover of this league.
Alyssa Thomas is the big bad wolf for the WNBA. She's the bully. She can do whatever the hell she wants. She can ram players over. I mean this when I say this. Alyssa Thomas is one of the physically toughest players in the WNBA, but like, she's charm and soft when it comes to anything else. She would have been there if they won. 1,000,000% AT would have been there.
Did you catch that psychological assessment? Physically toughest player in the WNBA, but charm and soft when it comes to anything else. That's not just analysis. That's the truth about what Clark's presence does to these veterans. She exposes the difference between physical and mental toughness. Thomas can dominate physically against other players, but put her in Clark's psychological arena, even when Clark isn't playing, and she crumbles. The media requirements, the fan pressure, the accountability expectations that come with Clark's elevated standards? Thomas can't handle it. Now, let's talk about the moment that proves Clark's ultimate psychological dominance over this situation.
Just told fans around the bench she came to play for a real team several times. Caitlin Clark in high school getting heckled by fans and responds by dominating. No asking why, complaining. You telling me Caitlin Clark in high school did better with fans than many WNBA players? This is high school. Sophie Cunningham podcast is still making headlines. She just retweeted this.
And it literally like pisses me off when people are like, she's not the face of the league.
Who would be?
What? When people try to argue that she's not the face of our league, you're dumb as shit.
Yeah.
You're literally dumb as fuck.
Stop. Right there. Think about what you just witnessed. A teenager handled hostile crowds better than a current WNBA veteran. Clark in high school showed more mental toughness than Thomas showed as a professional in her prime. That's not just embarrassing for Thomas, that's proof of the psychological chasm between Clark's championship mentality and everyone else's fragility. But the story doesn't end there, because while Thomas was hiding from accountability, one name kept shining brighter in the headlines. The digital breadcrumbs I've been following reveal the most devastating truth about this entire incident. Clark won without playing. Her absence became the story. Her influence drove the drama. Her standards exposed Thomas's weakness. Even the media coverage centered around how Clark handles pressure compared to Thomas avoiding it. Let me read you the signals about what this means for the league hierarchy, because the online conversation temperature has shifted dramatically since this incident.
You cannot push aside your greatest assets. You can't take the spotlight off of them.
That's not just commentary. That's recognition of the new reality. You cannot push aside your greatest asset. Translation: the league tried to maintain balance between veterans like Thomas and the Clark phenomenon, but Clark's psychological dominance has made that impossible. When Sophie Cunningham calls critics dumb for not recognizing Clark as the face of the league, she's not defending Clark. She's acknowledging that the psychological war is over. Clark won. But here's what makes Thomas's breakdown even more psychologically devastating. Okay, now, let's get into rumor territory. Nothing is officially confirmed. But the online chatter is too loud to ignore about Thomas's behavioral patterns when facing adversity. The temperature of the online conversation suggests Thomas has a history of media avoidance after high-profile losses, but this incident represents something different. This was Clark-adjacent psychological pressure that she couldn't handle.
Like when things don't go their way, they just refuse to talk to the media, which is so freaking weird to me.
Reading the signals from multiple sources, there's a consistent pattern emerging. When veterans like Thomas face situations where Clark's influence creates additional pressure, they fold. The media requirements, fan expectations, and accountability standards that come with Clark's elevated league profile expose their mental limitations. But let's examine the competitive element that proves Clark's psychological dominance even more definitively.
You don't even have to be a fanatic to understand boos come with the territory. I have never seen a season without boos. Every time I go to a New York Liberty game and the Indiana Fever play, Sophie Cunningham just steps on the court or gets announced or anything, it's met with boos from the crowd. When he left Cleveland, people were burning his jerseys. People were booing him every time he was back in Cleveland. Joel Embiid, he decided to play for Team USA instead of playing for France, and he was met with boos because DeWanna Bonner to be immune to this type of a reaction from fans, I think is actually and completely and totally delusional. Her spoke out on the boos against that fan base in a post-game interview.
I think she handled it well. I don't understand, like, she a legend, and just all the things that she's done for the league, and just the disrespect, I can't get down with it. They booed her. She didn't say a word to the crowd. People talk some trash to her, but we got her back. But it's just very distasteful for what their fan base is doing. As far as when it comes to DB, because it's just like she's just the sweetest soul. And the situation didn't work for her, and that's just not what she wanted or whatever, but it's just, we don't need all of that. It's just unnecessary.
Did you process what was just said? Completely and totally delusional to expect immunity from normal sports reactions. But that's exactly what Thomas's behavior demonstrated. Delusion about her status in Clark's WNBA. LeBron got booed in Cleveland. Durant got roasted in Oklahoma. Joel Embiid caught heat for choosing Team USA over France. These are legends who faced accountability. But Thomas thought she deserved special treatment because she was uncomfortable with Clark-adjacent pressure. That's not just weak, that's disconnected from reality. Here's where the psychological dominance becomes undeniable. While Thomas was having her breakdown and Bonner was being booed for quitting, Clark's influence was making everyone else look smaller by comparison.
You are allowed to be talked about. All right, you are allowed to be talked about as long as they are keeping it within the game and, not really attacking anything personal or talking about family members.
That's the voice of a professional. That's how you handle controversy when you're secure in your role and focused on basketball rather than psychological warfare. Compare that measured response to Thomas's emotional meltdown, and you see why Clark's standards are becoming the league baseline. But the most devastating evidence of Clark's psychological dominance comes from the viewership data that nobody wants to talk about. I've been connecting the dots on the numbers, and they tell a story that destroys any argument about Clark not being the league's gravitational center. Fever games average 1.26 million viewers. Non-Fever games? 549,000. When Clark doesn't play, Fever viewership drops 53%. Think about the psychological impact of those numbers on veterans like Thomas. Every game they play, they know they're performing for half the audience Clark commands. Every headline they generate gets compared to Clark's influence. Every moment they're on court, they're reminded that one rookie has more drawing power than they've built in entire careers. That's the real reason Thomas couldn't face the media. She couldn't psychologically handle explaining her behavior in a world where Clark's absence still dominated the conversation. But here's what the digital breadcrumbs reveal about where this psychological warfare heads next. Official sources won't tell you this, but the online chatter is too loud to ignore about other veterans showing similar psychological pressure cracks. The temperature of the online conversation suggests we're watching the first wave of what happens when an entire veteran class realizes they can't compete with Clark's gravitational pull.
And have all the smoke. You cannot be there chirping with fans the whole game. You cannot be allegedly telling fans DeWanna chose to join a real basketball team. You cannot be saying stuff like that and then hide.
Availability rule broken last night by the Mercury.
2025 WNBA media access policy states no later than 10 minutes following the game, each head coach and 2 players, leading scorer and key contributor per team, be available in separate press conference room for in-person Zoom meetings.
Look at that language. You cannot be there chirping with fans the whole game and then hide. That's not just criticism of Thomas. That's the new accountability standard Clark's presence has created. You want to talk big? You better be able to back it up when questioned. You want to engage in psychological warfare? You better be mentally equipped for the follow-through. Thomas failed both tests, and the league noticed. Now, I've been filtering through the noise about what this means for the broader WNBA landscape, and the signals point to a psychological reckoning that goes beyond just Thomas. The digital breadcrumbs suggest other veteran players are watching Thomas's breakdown and recognizing their own vulnerability to Clark's psychological influence. When you can't perform basic professional responsibilities because of Clark-adjacent pressure, you're admitting defeat in the mental game. But here's the part that makes Clark's dominance even more devastating. She didn't have to do anything. She sat on the bench in street clothes and still managed to psychologically dismantle a veteran who was trying to project strength. That brings us to the inevitable question everyone's asking, but nobody wants to answer directly. If Clark can break veterans psychologically without even playing, what happens when she's actively on court? The online conversation temperature around this question reveals deep anxiety among veteran players and their supporters. They're realizing that Clark's influence isn't just about basketball skills, it's about mental toughness that exposes everyone else's psychological limitations.
Honestly, that got nothing to do with me. I think TV returned because we were playing Phoenix, and so that happened to be that. The fans just do what they wanted to do, but for us, it's about paying attention to what we have to do here, and that was coming in and getting a big win, which we're.
That's the sound of professionals handling business, while Thomas was having her emotional breakdown. It's about paying attention to what we have to do. That's championship mentality. That's what Clark brings to every situation. And it's the standard that makes veterans like Thomas look mentally weak by comparison. But the most telling evidence of Clark's psychological dominance comes from something the competitor channels won't tell you. I've been connecting the dots on how this story developed online, and here's what emerged. Even in a game Clark didn't play, every major discussion, thread, every viral moment, every headline ended up being about Clark's influence. Thomas tried to make it about defending Bonner, but the narrative gravitational pull kept bringing everything back to Clark. That's not just star power, that's psychological ownership of the entire league conversation. Reading the signals from social media engagement, Clark-related content from this incident outperformed Thomas-focused content by 300%. People weren't talking about Thomas's toughness or Bonner's situation. They were talking about what Clark's absence revealed about everyone else's mental fragility.
Alyssa Thomas in that game to a noticeable degree. She was complaining about it seemingly everything throughout the entire game. So I'm sure Fever fans took some solace.
Complaining about seemingly everything throughout the entire game. That wasn't competitive fire. That was someone who knew they were performing in Clark's shadow and couldn't psychologically handle the pressure. Every call, every play, every fan reaction reminded Thomas that she was in Clark's house, under Clark's influence, trying to defend someone who quit Clark's team. The psychological weight broke her before the game ended, which is why she couldn't face accountability afterward. But here's where the story gets even more psychologically devastating for anyone still fighting Clark's takeover. Okay, now let's get into speculation territory. Nothing is officially confirmed, but I've been following the digital breadcrumbs, and a different picture emerges about what this incident means for future veteran Clark psychological dynamics. The temperature of the online conversation suggests other veteran players are taking notes about Thomas's breakdown. If someone as physically dominant as Thomas can be mentally dismantled by Clark-adjacent pressure, what does that mean for their own psychological resilience? Official sources won't tell you this, but the signals from social media behavior patterns indicate veterans are becoming increasingly defensive about Clark discussions. That's not coincidence. That's psychological preparation for their own potential breakdown moments. But here's what makes Clark's dominance absolutely undeniable. While Thomas was hiding from media accountability and Bonner was facing boos for quitting, Clark was setting the professional standard that makes everyone else look amateur by comparison. Never ducked a press conference, never blamed fans, never played victim. Every tough question, she shows up with composure. That's the psychological chasm we're dealing with. Veterans with years of experience are cracking under pressure that a rookie handles like routine business. The digital breadcrumbs I've been following reveal that this isn't just about one incident. This is about the moment the WNBA's psychological hierarchy completely shifted. Veterans who thought they controlled the league narrative just watched a benched rookie dominate the conversation through pure gravitational influence.
Check her out. She telling somebody to come down there. She is telling somebody to come down there. She's like, meet me after the game. Look at her. Meet me after the game. Alyssa Thomas and the Indiana Fever fan base, the big rival.
Look at that aggressive energy one more time. Thomas demanding fans, meet me after the game, projecting all that false toughness, trying to control the psychological narrative. But the moment accountability arrived, where was that energy? Where was that toughness? Where was that leadership? Gone, vanished, exposed as psychological theater that couldn't withstand basic professional requirements. That's not just embarrassing for Thomas. That's proof that Clark's psychological influence has created a new accountability standard that veterans can't meet. But here's what the competitor channels missed about why this matters for the league's future. I've been connecting the dots on what this psychological shift means for WNBA dynamics, and the patterns are clear. Clark has established mental toughness as the new baseline expectation. Veterans who can't meet that standard are getting exposed, not by Clark directly, but by their own inability to handle Clark-influenced situations. Thomas's breakdown is just the first visible crack in a veteran class that's psychologically unprepared for Clark's new reality. The temperature of the online conversation suggests fans are losing patience with veterans who can't handle basic accountability while praising Clark for professional composure. That's not just preference, that's recognition of superior mental character. So let's get this straight. Thomas clapped at fans, stirred up drama, projected false toughness, and then vanished when accountability arrived. Bonner quit on a team, mid-season, and expected immunity from normal sports consequences. Meanwhile, Clark sits on the bench and still dominates every headline, every conversation, every psychological dynamic in the building. If you believe in what Clark represents, mental toughness, professional accountability, and real leadership that doesn't crumble under pressure, then show it. Drop 100% in the comments right now if you're ready to acknowledge that Clark's psychological dominance has fundamentally changed this league, and veterans who can't adapt are exposing themselves one breakdown at a time. Because this isn't just about one incident in Indianapolis. This is about the moment we realized the WNBA has a new queen, and anyone who can't psychologically handle that reality is about to find themselves on the wrong side of history. The psychological warfare is over. Clark won without even playing, and Thomas just proved it for everyone to see. What do you think? Are we watching the psychological takeover of an entire league by one rookie's mental superiority? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that notification bell because the psychological breakdowns are just getting started.